The Dutch Golden Age took place pretty much during the 17th century, mainly during the Netherlands' war for independence from Spain. They were Protestants and the Spanish were Catholics, and they were not so much into the same type of religious devotion that the Spanish were. So that time period was really the focus of the golden age of art, and it focused on quite a few specialized types of painting that we'll talk about during this video. Historical painting was probably the least practiced specialty type of painting during the Dutch Golden Age. Those who did it focused on historical figures, a lot of figures from mythology, and a lot of biblical scenes as well. This was just not as common for the Dutch. They were just a lot more into realism, scenes of regular people, and what was going on in the natural world. Our example for historical painting is actually from Rembrandt van Rijn. This was something that he painted in 1629 when he was only 23 years old. It's Judas trying to return the 30 pieces of silver after he betrays Christ. He was a lifelong student of the Bible. He trained with a historical painter when he was very young. This is a traditional piece. He gets better at working with light as he goes on in his career. And he actually did complete a couple more historical pieces before he really kind of switched over to portraits. Another type of specialized painting the Dutch practiced was maritime scenes. Because they're a seafaring people with a hefty navy and were into the era of colonization and exploration, they focus quite a bit on scenes of water, whether that be freshwater rivers or saltwater oceans. Albert Cuyp, who painted this particular scene, became a master of golden hour water scenes. That golden hour is kind of that beautiful time during sunrise and sunset. He was just a master of light because he spent so much time looking at the water and how it reflects on the water. Another specialty type of painting were landscapes. Landscapes are what you would think, meadows, woods, tilled fields, and things like that. But it also could be scenes from battles, cityscapes, ruins. All of those were subjects that landscape painters worked on. This is Landscape with Windmills near Haarlem. I think it's a quintessential Netherlandish scene. It's by Jacob van Ruydel, and he did some traveling outside of the Netherlands. He worked on his craft and really got good at it. He had a huge effect on quite a few painters who came after him. People like Thomas Gainsborough, Turner, Constable, Joshua Reynolds, Vincent van Gogh, Claude Monet. So he was had a huge legacy as a landscape painter in terms of future art movements. Our next type of specialty painting is the still life. The Dutch were super into these paintings of flower vases or tablescapes that might be covered with food or other kinds of items. And they were incredibly realistic. They were shiny. You could see metal. The lemons looked like you could smell them. But these were designed as what are called vanitas paintings. They reminded you that life is fleeting. The flowers die. The food rots. Mice nibble what's on the table. There's a lot of cool stuff in this still life from Peter Claus. You can see the shininess of the pot, the wine, and the goblet. You can see all of the food looks extremely realistic. But there's actually bread and wine. That is a Christian reference. And then there's that pocket watch, which would symbolize the passage of time. So eat all this and enjoy it, but it's going to rot, and so are you. Okay, one of my favorite specialties from this era are genre paintings. These are scenes from everyday life. These are unrecognizable people, just generic people doing their thing, whatever that might be. They could be peasants, they could be at a tavern, they could be at home, they could be wealthy people. But this is part of that Dutch realism. They really liked capturing everyday life. However, these genre paintings were often kind of morality statements, just like the Vanitas still life paintings we just looked at. So there's usually a lesson to be learned. Jan Steen created the Merry Family. This is, the adults having a good time, and the kids are watching them and trying to have the same kind of good time that the adults are having. So the moral here, and there's actually a note on the mantelpiece that says, "So father, so son." Our final specialty type of painting for the Dutch Golden Age were portraits. Uh, Artists spent a great deal of time on self-portraits, portraits of individual sitters, group portraits, and what are called tronies. Rembrandt is our representative for self-portraits because he was one of the most prolific self-portrait painters in the history of art. He started when he was very young and continued all the way up until just before his death. And you can see the progression of his age and experience over time. Frans Hals, the artist who painted this portrait, was in high demand and very popular as a portraitist. He did a good job of bringing out the personalities in his sitters. This is called the Laughing Cavalier. It's an unusual painting because the man has kind of a half smile on his face. This wasn't a common practice for paintings until the 18th century. This is a group portrait, another from Frans Hals. It is the banquet of the officers of the St. George Civic Guard Company. There were quite a few kind of independent militias that helped with keeping the peace and protecting towns in the Netherlands. They were elected and served 3-year terms, and these folks contacted him to commemorate the end of their service. Frans Hals was actually in the militia as well, so he kind of had a kinship with them and painted them actually more than once. So this is probably the most famous painting you've seen in this video. This is Johann Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring. She's had a lot of different names over the centuries, but she is a tronie, Tronie. That means kind of a floating head. She's not designed to be a specific person like the Mona Lisa, for example. She is almost like a caricature. She's dressed in exotic clothing. She's wearing a turban. And she has a unique facial expression on her face. So tronies could be from the neck up, from the shoulders up. Occasionally you'll see their arms. You'll very rarely see more than that of their bodies. That's what a tronie is. Okay, you'll notice that I just searched Google Arts and Culture, and the very first option, of course, since it's Google, is the Google Arts and Culture website. If you look a couple below, you can see that there's an app for your Android phone, and there's also an app for iTunes. I played with it on my iPhone, and it's got everything that the regular website has. So we're going to click on that website and take a look at what's going on there. So you have some main subjects as you first land on the web page. You can see that there's arts and culture is going to include science as well. and history. So there's a lot of really interesting articles in here. But we also can see art. So here's a virtual gallery right here. So how can we find the Dutch Golden Age? Right, so that's our question. So we have art movements. What was the Grand Tour? We've already talked about that. So we're going to do a little bit of searching. And you can see I've already done a little bit of searching. So let's try Dutch Golden Age. And you can see there's some descriptions, and you're already seeing some examples of artworks from the time period. If you move farther down, there are quite a few images in the gallery. You can click on any of them. You can see that there are specific artists that are highlighted as well. So, of course, Rembrandt, most people know all about him. You would also be able to find, for example, Vermeer. He has an entire exhibit or an entire showcase, I guess is the best word, for on Google Arts and Culture. So there's lots of cool ways to search, including within the Dutch Golden Age. And so what I would like for you to do as a research kind of short project is to select one of the types of specialty paintings that we talked about earlier. So that includes landscapes, still lifes, portraits, and you could even go as specific as tronies or group portraits, genre paintings, those scenes of everyday life, maritime scenes, history paintings. So you have quite a few that you could choose from, or you could focus on a specific artist from the Dutch Golden Age. And so I'm going to give you some information that you'll have to work with in terms of how to make your selection and what I'd like you to do with that. But this is going to, I think, be a really good resource for you to pursue when you're starting to look for more information about the Dutch Golden Age. And hopefully, as you're looking at this header on the web page, you would be able to say that that is a still life.